Today I'm speaking with Jan Frydenbo-Bruvoll. Jan is the founder of Skipa and has spent nearly 30 years helping businesses grow and evolve in the digital-first world. From being the first tech team member and launching the digital arm of Norway's largest news brand to scaling companies 10 and 20x, Jan has seen firsthand how the right technical decisions can unlock big opportunities or create unexpected challenges. Jan is passionate about making technology work for people, not the other way around. Through Skipa, he helps investors, entrepreneurs, and business leaders make smarter, future-proof decisions and create lasting value. For Jan, it's all about working with ambitious people who want to solve tough problems and build something meaningful. Jan can be reached at jan@skipa.uk. That's Skipa. And his website is skipa, skipa.uk. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I have Jan Frydenbo-Bruvoll. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Jan is the founder of Skipa, and he's got nearly 30 years of experience helping businesses grow through smart use of technology. I know Jan through several different interactions, had a great time working with him in different cases, and I'm happy to have you here, Jan. So welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Maybe you could introduce yourself and perhaps reintroduce yourself without butchering your name like the way I might have. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing these days.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I guess the sort of the way that I describe myself is a recovering techie. I came up the development and operations route as a software developer many, many moons ago. Then I gradually started doing some consulting work. Again, in hindsight, knowing that this stuff was called carve-outs and change management and interim and fractional roles and all of that stuff. Back then, to me, it was just jobs. Um, I had a former stint as an entrepreneur for 10 years. I formed a company within server center operations, a managed service provider, um, which was an interesting learning experience in itself for me personally, not just building the business, but more how I reacted to that whole experience. So I ended up closing down the company for many reasons, just before COVID, and then starting up something new during COVID. It's obviously going to be a slow affair. And now I've settled down on trying to make use of my experience as a techie, still broad, deep, hands-on, but also as a founder, and then hopefully also as a leader, or the other way around. I know a lot of stuff about how not to be a good leader, and I put that all together as a fractional CTO, helping companies who don't have the budget to bring in the big guns to do big gun stuff.
Mm-hmm. And you're originally from Norway, right?
Yep, exactly. Norwegian born and
Yeah.
bred.
Yeah.
Been in the UK for 25 years now, more or less exactly. So I guess they wouldn't take me back if I knocked on the door.
Yeah. Oh, maybe they would. You never know. So, I
Yeah.
think it's great. I think it's great what you're doing. And so much these days, I also observe it in my own industry, sort of being tech savvy is critical. I think a lot of companies that I observe, I have the impression that their leadership doesn't see it as a critical thing today because, they still have customers and they have clients and they've been around for a while. But my impression is that they're not lending enough credence to technological advancement inside their way of working, their offering. You know, I my impression is that people view companies as like, oh, that's a tech company, that's like Google, or that's like a provider of a technology. That's a tech company. That's what a tech company is. And we're not a tech company. We do something else. We manufacture something, or we have a service that we provide, or we're a consultant. Whereas in reality, and I think particularly with AI these days, is like if you don't have like a really robust understanding of technology and how to use it, even if you don't produce and sell a technological product, things are just going to move way past you like very, very fast. It's like I guess I liken this to like if you were not using the internet in 2007, like you would be pretty behind, right?
Yeah.
I feel that there's a phase in business and industry going on right now globally where that kind of thing is happening. And you're right, like there's just not enough knowledgeable talent out there, either as managers or doers or developers, etc., to equip every small and medium-sized business with this kind of capability, right? So I think it's a little bit of a seismic shift because many of these companies, in my view, will in some way be left behind because of their lack of awareness and functionality in this area. I feel it even ourselves. Like, I mean, something that I think about all the time. Like, are we utilizing AI enough? Like, are we thinking about like the technological changes that are happening? Are we building something that's going to be obsolete too soon? Like all of these different types of things. And we're
Yeah.
a tech company, right? So if you're not a tech company and you're not focused on that day to day, you've got even more dilution of focus, right? So,
Yeah, it is interesting that, I mean, to your sort of first comment, then I broadly, so what I forgot to mention earlier is I also work a lot with investors. So I end up doing a lot of audits of companies.
mhm,
Um, I see a lot of um, odd stuff is the best way I can put it. Lots of really, really good companies. That's not what I mean, but stuff that when you see it from the outside, it's so obviously broken. And you wonder, well, how can all of these intelligent people get it so wrong?
mhm,
Um, but yeah, just sort of finish off my previous comment there. I mean, the two buckets that I put companies in is literally these days is going to be either tech centric, like the typical software SaaS, um, or anything sort of dealing directly with IT or producing products and services within the sector. And then all the others are tech dependent.
mhm,
There is no company these days, unless you are completely offline and you do, I don't know, gardening services and go to door in a local community and get your business that way. But you are going to be, even them, I mean, they're probably dependent on WhatsApp somehow or something. But what I find fascinating though is that there seems to be, and I'm sure every other functional area feels exactly the same, but since I've been on the inside and around working with and for tech for such a long time, I feel there's a desperate lack of producing good leadership coming up the funnel.
mhm,
Um, so you have really hardworking people in the tech sector, but finding good leaders who set direction and who think about the adjacent areas that they're supporting or working within the company, they're kind of hard to find.
mhm,
Um, and then you end up with sort of odd situations where I remember seeing that even in my very first job, where you have this sort of mutual snobbery where the IT department is going, oh, I can't be bothered with all of that. I mean, what is sales drive home now,
mhm,
idiots? And we have to support them finding their passwords and stuff. I mean, they don't know anything, which to me is completely a pointless attitude to have. But anyway, it is there for many reasons. But then you have the other way, where you have a CEO who's sort of half bragging that, haha, I know so little of technology that I don't even know how to open Word without assistance.
mhm,
And the chasm in terms of communication and business alignment that you end up with between those two camps is just enormous.
mhm,
Um, and to sort of round this round off a little bit, I guess what I see now a lot, especially in these AI times, is people running around with the AI hammer and looking for something to apply it on, instead of
mhm,
going back to business basics, leadership basics, what's the biggest problem, how are we going to solve it, and then somewhere in that process, maybe considering whether tech is part of it.
mhm,
But I kind of hope not, if you see what I mean. I've said to companies several times that if your operational process works with post-its on a Kanban board on the wall, don't
mhm,
mess with it. If you have
mhm,
100 customers, don't buy a CRM system. It's just
Mhm.
going to slow you down. Just skip it. Tech's not useful if you don't have a tech problem to solve.
Right. Do you find that do you find that this is a sort of like an impediment to some companies where they're just kind of like getting involved in being sold these products? I mean, because the other thing is like it's not just the managers making a decision to use a piece of technology or to, I think AI is a great example to like, oh, AI is going to change everything. And like AI's got, it kind of holds all these false promises of what it can do in many ways. But
Yeah,
not only do you have to deal with deciding whether or not that's right for your business, you've gotten like a barrage of salespeople trying to sell you solutions that are supposedly going to work for your business. Um,
yeah,
to the point where I get some of these emails where they'll say things like, "We want to partner with you. We think we can make so much money together with you." And I'll say like, well, "Okay, well, like about what?" Like, because I'm just kind of playing with them because these are cold emails, right? And
yeah.
they literally have no idea what it is even the company does. They have no idea what it is they're selling. They're just kind of like peddling this idea around AI, which just shows you that there's a froth out there, which for the uninformed audience, I mean, I consider myself a relatively informed audience, but there's lots of uninformed audience out there. I think that they're wasting a lot of time chasing castles in the air, if you will, that they're just like that aren't there, right? Right. And I think that's unfortunate, more or less.
Yeah, but I guess I sort of see two symptoms, and I'm not trying to be a sort of pet myself as a saint here. I mean, I've made the same mistakes myself, but there's a tendency to run out and choose the tools before you know the problem properly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working for a client at the moment who they need a new ERP system. Before they have, I mean, to my sort of I don't know, to my quality standards, before they've defined exactly what it is they need and what they think they will need 5 years down the line, they're already talking to vendors.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're gonna end up with a skewed discussion when you where you talk about sort of specific features and um, you flip the discussion over to discussing the tool instead of discussing the solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess I mean, and to your other point about the sort of the hype around, I guess again, AI is easy to discuss, but I think it's a broader problem. So people just hoping for simple solutions. And AI sounds like, oh yeah, this is this intelligent thing and just sort everything out for me, knowing that going back and sorting out the serious problem that the business has, let's say it's customer reach or um, I mean delivery quality, whatever it is, that requires hard work. There is no silver bullet. And I have a feeling that tech ends up being that kind of thing that everybody hopes it's just going to be a silver bullet because it's so opaque and so complex. Surely there's intelligent people behind it. So just bring some of them in and slap a couple of $1 million on the table. All my problems are going to go away. They're
Yeah.
probably just going to
It's
be
like
much, much worse afterwards.
it's like taking a pill. Like, oh, I don't have to be healthy. I can just take a medicine for it. Do you think
Yeah.
that do you think that the industry together with the media is playing a role in that? I mean, I get that impression that, the industry obviously wants to get attention, right? Of course, why wouldn't they? The tech industry, and then the media needs something to talk about, right? Like the next great revolution.
Yeah. I mean, so my first 15 years were in media, so I have a mixed relationship to that. I mean, I didn't choose to work for media. That was just a random first job. But then I'm really super grateful for it. I had a fantastic learning experience. But this was in Norway, which is one of the sort of strongholds of journalism, rightfully so. It's
Mm-hmm.
trustworthy, it was trusted. And I came into this thing with the sort of view um, of media that would have been formed during the 80s. So again, sort of serious newspapers and reporting things reasonably fairly, very little political agenda and that kind of stuff. And then I was part of ruining the business model because
Hmm.
for whatever reason, we didn't continue subscriptions. We went for ads. And
Hmm.
then you have the drive for clicks and views. And then everything is war types and scandal and dragging people into sort of hype and um, big stuff and explanation and deep journalism. It just doesn't pay. The business model is broken. You can't do it. I mean, there are a
Hmm.
couple of companies who manage to do it, but if I sat at the top of a publisher these days, I wouldn't try either. How the hell do you make it work financially?
Mm.
Um, so you have that kind of thing where the whole media industry or the sort of news industry is dragged towards hype, whether they want it or not, whether that's what they wanted to do when they studied journalism back in the days. And then on the other side, like you say, I mean, there's plenty of very serious companies out there who
Hmm.
try really hard to build good products, but then you have that sort of froth of people who've heard over the last 15 years that, yeah, just get VC funding, you'll be a millionaire.
Hmm.
Easy. That's 3 years,
Hmm.
it's 2 years, it's 1 year now.
Hmm.
And again, even that is quite broken because nobody talks about the fact that if you get VC funding, there's a 1% likelihood of even making it to an exit. And if you make it to an exit, it's quite unlikely that the founder gets anything at all.
Yeah.
So you end up sort of perpetuating these fantastical stories about people who get filthy rich for almost no work. And what it boils down to is that if you want to get rich, then if you don't want the lottery style winnings, it's still just hard work. It's taking the bull by the horns. It's sorting out the big problems in the proper way. You can't buy yourself out of it. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's no easy way.
So what are the main things that you found in kind of the trade-offs that you deal with when you get to a client situation? You know, I mean, of course, I know my own scenario. I mean, I know it pretty well, but I'm actually kind of interested to hear what other small, medium businesses run into in these types of cases and that you find yourself helping them with, the decisions that they're dealing with, what are they weighing, cost, speed, etc. Um, because I think as we've just been discussing, it's easy for someone to believe that if I just make this big investment and I put money on the table, that everything's going to become easier. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of pieces that have to fall into place to make a technology work. And then it
Mm.
also has to have an application, right? And it has to have a reason for existing. So it's like, is that actually solving a problem or not, right? Um, and usually it doesn't deliver as much value as one imagines because it's really just a tool, right? It's just a tool like a screwdriver or a hammer. It's a tool.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
I guess in terms of sort of when I get brought in, it is normally it's quite painful.
Mm.
Um, there's some sort of symptom that's become so unbearable that the business kind of understands that even if they know nothing about tech, the problem is probably tech related in some way or another.
Hmm.
But when it comes down to it, the problem isn't tech. It is mostly process. It's mostly planning. Um, but in terms of what you say about weighing things against each other, I mean, in theory, I guess you still have that sort of old saying that you can have speed, quality, or cost under control, but you can only have two of the three at any given time.
Hmm.
I don't know. The opportunist and contrarian in me sort of refuses to think of things like that. You can have all three, but it's bloody hard.
Hmm.
Um, but what I feel happens a lot, again, because tech tends to be opaque and it tends to not have leadership representation by the table. Typically, it hides behind an FD and CEO or a CFO, maybe a COO. So when you're kind of weighing a problem, you're still sitting there with this black box in the discussion that that isn't very well defined. It's like, yeah, we're going to solve this by installing some system or other, but that's no discussion. It's just, yeah,
Mhm.
that'll happen. And then you hand it
Yep.
down to an IT manager who doesn't even know why they're doing it. And it's going to be, it's that whole process is going to be perpetually lagging behind the needs of the company
Yep.
instead of the sort of what I consider the ideal situation where you have functional representation around the leadership table from any kind of function you need in your particular setting. So you can pre-plan and use the tools to accelerate things forward instead of hoping it's not going to slow you down.
Yep. Do you ever find that it's also used as an excuse for why other things aren't happening? Right? Like I just remember times when I've been working in companies where, there's a planned IT rollout or there's a planned tool or this or that's being built, and then people say like, well, that's not working so great now, but when we get this new thing, then it's all going to be fine. Whereas actually they could probably take some intermediate steps that are super low hanging fruit to make that thing better right away without even
Yeah,
having the piece of technology. So like it's almost like if you make a decision to say we are going to invest in this tool that's going to allow us to do XYZ better, that all of the other progress that you can make in XYZ area kind of stops, right?
yeah,
Because people stop thinking outside the box, right? Like if you have a car, you drive a car. If you have no car, well, you think about building a wagon. If you don't have no wagon, maybe you find a donkey, right? Like, you try to figure out some way to get from point A to point B, right?
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, I completely agree.
mm,
And you see that a lot, unfortunately, in outsourcing scenarios. And nothing against outsourcing companies per se, but because few of them deliver, I guess, sort of leadership resources that sit on the client side of the table, you end up with these sort of massive chunked projects that we are going to build this thing for you. We're going to scope it, and they do that really well. And then you sit there on your hands for 3 years waiting for this thing to suddenly deliver.
mhm,
By which time everything's moved along, and then you sort of realize, well, the fit isn't all that great anymore, and maybe we went over because the client kept coming back with things they had forgotten or whatever. But to your point, what if they could have then had like almost like a skunkworks team of 2 or 3 devs just chucking MVPs together to sort of sort little things out, or somebody who can do no code things, put together a little automation really quickly, just sort of an automatic reminder to clean up the CRM system every week. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything big at all,
yeah,
but if everything is sort of institutionalized with a formalized and formal IT manager who owns an outsourcing provider, there's just no nimbleness in that.
yeah. Yeah, it's only like these big moonshots which may or may not land, basically, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
which which comes to, a point that I think you made earlier is that a lot of this, it was shocking to me when I first worked in a tech company, is like much of the effectiveness of this has to do with not just the leadership of the implementation and of the decision, but also in the actual implementation of the tool. Is it going to be used by the people that are supposed to use it in the way that it's intended to be used? And I've
yeah,
struggled with this a lot myself too. Like I've thought, I can think of one case in particular where I had like a real strategic vision about how we could be very very agile, organizationally efficient in one particular area of our delivery that I think is really important to be strategically good in. And we're good in it anyway, right? We're good or good enough. Like we're good enough to be competitive in that area without any bells and whistles. And I was like, oh, we can really make like a Ferrari that'll make this run like super super well. And so we scoped it, we did it, we built it, and then I started to realize like, wait a second, like actually people just aren't even using this, right? Like it's like they're going plenty fast enough without the bells and whistles, and using the bells and whistles either doesn't exactly fit exactly what they need, right? So it needs some upgrading and updating to be used, or they just don't feel the pressure enough to feel the pain. Like, they're able to get it done really well without using the bells and whistles, so they just don't change, right? And so like
yeah,
actually sometimes orchestrating when is the right time to have that happen is pretty difficult, because if they're not adopting the tool, it either can be that it doesn't do the job it's supposed to do, or it doesn't do the job it's supposed to do as easily, right? Or they just don't need to, right? So you need to have both a need and a tool that works, and then it actually starts to you start to see the benefit of this. And so I've even tried to create scenarios where like I artificially create pressure in certain areas to
Right.
make it happen. Sometimes it works
Yeah.
and sometimes it doesn't. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's a question about like what is the decision you make to do that investment. It's can be nerve wracking because you feel like, well, if I get to point B in a year and I haven't done this investment, I might find myself tremendously disadvantaged, right? But if I make the investment, I might find that I didn't need it anyway, right? And so like having the pressure of the actual requirement of the business lead you in these decisions is always the best way, I think, to manage that. But sometimes if you have that pressure, it's too late, right? So this is kind of like, I don't know if you have any comments on that give and take, but I think it's very easy to plan to do stuff that you end up not needing, right? But it's also dangerous to plan not to do something because you're not totally sure you need it yet, because it might happen much quicker than you think.
Yeah, it's a fascinating problem. I mean, just sort of a tangent to that quickly first is I had this conversation the other day about IT budgets typically running over and whatever. And I was like, yeah, okay, I mean, that's not surprising because I mean, show me the IT budget that has actually, or no, a IT project that has actually budgeted properly for onboarding and training afterwards. Because that could be half the cost.
Yeah,
But that looks really nasty on when you're looking at the numbers. You sort of, yeah, well, no, we'll figure that out. And you start a project anyway. And then obviously you start overrunning because you need training and onboarding. Or you end up in the situation you're describing, which is that everything is ready, is laid out, and nobody knows about the system, let alone use it.
yeah,
But what I find interesting about the other side of that, though, is that to your point about the pain, people are so busy, whatever they're doing, obviously, they don't just sit around. So they're only going to be able to and willing to focus on stuff that is truly painful if it isn't right there in front of them. So if you talk about anything that looks like a sort of investment of time, effort, or money, or whatever, it will have to be super painful for you to get that attention. But if you then try and solve that with some massive chunky project that takes 3 years to deliver, these guys with that massive pain, they will have to find a solution on the way there anyway. So when you finally come with your solution, the pain's gone. They fixed
yeah,
it because they
yeah,
had to.
yeah,
And that's also why I sort of find it's tricky in any kind of organization where you need a nimble IT organization who can come in and sort of almost like Red Adair to dive in and fix your immediate pain right now. And then you look a little bit deeper and say, okay, was that enough? Are we cool? Or
mm,
do we need to do something more structural, or is there even a sort of organizationally wide I mean, even a change of the organization could be that needs to happen, and then may or may not be underpinned by tech.
right,
Um, but look at the typical SME, where I mean, you could be 100 head count with 3 or 4 guys trying to operate an ERP system and manage a couple of vendors and whatever. They're not going to be able to be nimble like that. There is no development capacity internally.
yeah,
And nobody was hired to be leaders. You were hired to be functional experts.
yeah, yeah. And if they have
And
to then
it's
fight for
hard.
resources, it's even more difficult if they have to fight for resources to get that development done, right? Um,
Uh,
I think over time that can put you into kind of a technology debt, right? Which may be difficult to overcome. Because you're right. I think if you're in a tech company that's delivering tech as a product, perhaps this maybe even becomes easier because you have the direct feedback of whether or not you're selling that product or whether or not the client is asking you for that product. But when you're
uh,
building tech that's used for internal processes, maybe in a non-tech company or in the back end of a tech company, there it's much easier to, I think, as a manager decide, well, look, you'll solve that problem in a different way and I can save the investment, and I can focus on the thing that I can sell, right? And then you get into like operational and technical debt, in the back end of your business over time, right? And perhaps, I don't know, what do you think? Perhaps this is more common in non-tech companies because it's just so easy to say, oh, well, they'll sort it out, and then I don't have to spend that, 250K on this new piece of internal software that they may never use, and then you do that enough, and then you get so far behind that you can never catch up. Then a new entrant perhaps comes into your business, into your industry, and they are tech enabled from the very beginning, and they could just go way faster because they don't not carrying all that baggage, right?
Yeah, but I think the picture is more nuanced than that, though. And I'm not meaning that as an attack on what you said, but I was sort of thinking of, I don't think the tech debt situation is much different whether you're tech centric or tech dependent.
Okay.
Because a tech dependent company, they accrue tech debt whether they want it or not, just because the way they're staffed.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess their tech debt handling is much sort of chunkier. You kind of go into what are they called again in English? These sort of voluntary bankruptcy agreements or whatever they are. You drag a legacy system along with you for so long that eventually you just have to scrap it and you start
Right.
from zero again, right?
Yeah.
Which is super painful. And it definitely slows down business and has been slowing down business for ages and ages. It's a bit like getting trapped in credit card debt.
Right.
Um, and a tech-centric company they at least have the tools to do something about it because they build their own stuff. I mean, they cook their own dog food, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
But unless you actively budget for handling tech debt, when you build your sprint, you sort of say religiously that, okay, 20% of our time this week is going to go into handling that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to if you have debt on a credit card, if you just ignore it and let them take the minimum, I mean, credit card companies, they know what they're doing. They are keeping you exactly on the balance to make sure that you do not reduce what you owe. And
Right.
that's kind of what happens in this sort of tech debt scenario too. And to your last point about, I mean, being overtaken by new entrants, I think it's just because they don't have any tech debt to deal with. So they can focus only on new features
Mm-hmm.
and they rush away and do that. But if you don't then at some stage sort of mature in terms of how you build stuff, they too will accumulate exactly the same tech debt. So they will
Yeah.
be
I mean,
overtaken.
I think this happens with any company that grows, right? I mean, there's two paths when you start a company. One is that it dies, meaning you don't have money to invest in this stuff anyway, right?
Yeah.
Or it it grows or sustains itself. And then you get into a situation where you're wanting to repeat the thing that you've done before to profit maximize, right? Because that's what, human nature tells us to do. In which case then you lose this sort of naivete of the brand new company, because the brand new company, they can choose whatever they want to invest in, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't exist, right? And so I think that's also part and parcel to the way that innovation works. Like companies are getting disrupted faster and faster these days because even if they're brand new, 5 years later they might be kind of obsolete because somebody else is doing something that's even better you know because they just started fresh and then they have all the learning from looking at the folks that went before them. Right?
But I guess
I think that's going to happen in the AI world in general. I think these tools are going to get dramatically better very, very quickly, and then they will plateau to some level, right? As that cycle kind of peters itself out, right? Like you'll have some companies that die and others that like kind of spring up in the middle of this race and that survive, and then after a while you'll just have mature companies, right? And because you don't have as many brand new players coming into the industry as quickly, right? You'll lose a lot of this progress because everybody will just keep doing the same thing that they had been doing before because now it's all big
yeah,
companies left over, right? So yeah, that I think
yeah,
that's
but and I guess the sort of just the way I look at any kind of product or service, if we sort of zoom out and away from the tech for a sec. Well, actually, hang on. If we keep tech in mind, it's not just a depreciating asset. To me, it's sort of a decaying asset.
Hmm.
So even if, so to your point earlier about when you find your product market fit and you want to sort of go and find funding so you really could put a hammer down or whatever it is, it's easy to forget that every time you sell to a new customer, it's slightly less valuable to them, if you see what I mean, in
Hmm.
theory, because you are losing the edge because you're just trying to mass produce whatever fit customer number 2049.
Hmm.
And it's that sort of gradual decay of, um, well, not you're not if you again to my point earlier, if you don't invest in renewing from the bottom up,
Hmm.
eventually that has a card is just going to come tumbling down, or you're going to be out accelerated by somebody smaller, nimbler, or who happens to have better fit for customer number 19,000.
Right. Right. Right.
But it's a tough, and it comes back to business problems. It comes back to people again. It's not about tech. It's a tough thing to turn around where you've been hustling and trying desperately to survive for such a long time, and you finally find an edge, and you go, time to get some cash in. I mean, I've been working my socks off for such a long time. I just need a vacation. I need some money. I just need some time off.
Hmm.
And you're kind of grasping for the simple stuff
Right.
without realizing exactly like I did in my previous company. I didn't want any more pain in terms of rejigging the way I thought about the company to sort of level up the problem I would take on personally.
Hmm.
So my personal reaction there was to distance myself and just sort of go, I've done my thing. Now it's time to just cash out and go and get a sports car. And
Right.
the company was decaying under my feet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You know, I mean, there's also sometimes management changes, I suppose, that have to happen there, you know. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of like a leadership and motivational issue, I think, that everybody deals with, and, you know, including myself to some degree, right? Because yeah, this newness is really what brings new stuff, brings new ideas, brings all the newness. But then once you become established, one of the reasons you're established is that people keep repeatedly asking you for the same thing. And then you keep repeatedly doing the same thing because people keep asking you, what are you going to do? Say no? Like, no, I want to do something
yeah.
different. Yeah. So,
But there's also a fascinating kind of thing in there because when you're going out there with a new product, you're going to be an expert in your field. I mean, otherwise you're not going to survive for a second. So you kind of know a lot of stuff, but at the same time, you can't ignore your stakeholders. Your customers
hmm.
are right to some extent.
Hmm.
So to begin with, you are going to sort of take a lot of customer feedback and can listen to them and go, yeah, okay, that makes sense, and they're going to pay for that thing and whatever. But at the same time, I guess you are and you should be thinking a little bit like they need a car, not a faster horse. That kind of analogy.
Yeah.
But as you then start raking the money in, you lose that thinking.
Yeah.
Then you're just going to go for the faster horse thing because it's easier. You just do more of the same stuff. You get 200 people in on sales and a couple of devs and engineers and whatever, and just crank it out. Why
Yeah.
change? It's risky. Well, it feels risky. It's hard. I don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah. So in your experience doing what you do, have you seen cases like that? And how would you counteract them? Like if you're a business, if I'm a business leader, which I am, or if you're talking to a business leader and one is aware of this problem, right? I mean, I'm aware of this problem. I'm aware of the problem that it's great to keep doing the same thing that people come and ask us to do. Sometimes that's not the most innovative thing. It's not the thing where we're getting the most learning. And on the flip side, sometimes people come and ask us to do things that I think are very learning intensive, and therefore, actually, we're willing to work with them with a lot looser terms, shall we say, right? Um,
Yeah.
because there's value in that too. But you also have a business to run. Like, have you seen examples of ways in which people have maybe struck that balance well, done a good job of it through organizational design or through how they force themselves to spend certain amounts of time on certain things? I think one thing you can always do is say no to a customer. If it's a boring customer, particularly one that doesn't pay well and treats you badly, it's easy to say, you know what, I've got better time better things to do with my time than talk to you, right? All that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Right.
Yeah, I find maybe in particular tech companies, they sort of struggle to allocate cost truly to delivery cost on the sort of unit level to customers. So
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about cloud, it tends to be that sort of that just big chunk of stuff, and we average that out across all our customers, and that's it, without sort of thinking about more detail where we have two customers, the headcount might be equivalent, and one is super active and obviously cost us more in terms of CPU and database and all of that stuff. Are they even efficient? Or maybe there's something we could do about that. Are they needlessly costly because of the way we build the system?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so lots of that stuff is just sort of financial engineering and financial um, analysis or operational analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the companies that do this better, I find it's just having the discipline to do the boring processes properly. It's like when you run a sprint, and you can say whatever you want about agile. I mean, it doesn't fit everyone, and the rules are needlessly strict. You need to apply some common sense to this. But the retrospective is there for a reason. Is for you to find that 1% increment in quality of the previous sprint instead of, okay, how did we do our estimations? And
Mm-hmm.
in detail, who did well in terms of estimations and why did that go well? Is it because it's just better? Is their technique better? Is it more consistent? Whatever. I mean, can we learn something from that? Who's struggling with estimates? And is it
Mm-hmm.
because we give them the most complicated task? It's not because it's the worst engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have that kind of approach to it, the sort of introspection, almost like self-skepticism, not just on the tech level, everywhere in the company, where you go, okay, that worked. Now let's find out why it worked.
Mm-hmm.
So we can properly sort of tweak and tune and whittle down. Um, and again, I'm not trying to trying to say that any of this is easy is actually quite the opposite. But if you want to get to the top in whatever you do, whatever your definition of the top is, it is hard. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But it's surprisingly simple stuff that goes wrong because the simple stuff is boring, repetitive, doesn't feel intelligent. It doesn't, and typical founder is I mean, you're going to be wired to do scary, interesting, courageous stuff. And then somebody comes in and says, yeah, yeah, but you have to don't run. You spend 2 hours digging into some stupid little process every other Friday. Like, ugh, really?
Yeah.
I'm conquering the world. Don't bring me that
Yeah.
bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is also a constant sort of concern of everyone, is particularly if you're a founder, when you're maybe used to doing the hard stuff because you've done everything, is if I get a really good person, when is there going to be a task that's kind of beneath them that doesn't get done or that they don't want to do? Like, where do I need to think about supporting this person so that they can bring their best to the table, right? That's not a tech problem. I think that's a person problem, right? And yeah, you need, like, getting a full package is difficult, right? Like, everybody has their uh their drawbacks. So,
But I guess that even that can be counted for in relatively speaking simple ways, not uh, I mean, simple in terms of structure of the solution, but not simple in terms of implementing it.
mm-hmm.
But if you have well-defined KPIs and OKRs,
Mm-hmm.
where you basically set a direction for the company and explain to everyone what matters, I
Mm-hmm.
look at these three numbers. So, for instance, I talked to a client earlier today where it transpired that one of the most important things for them is that they have an onboarding fee,
Mm-hmm.
or a sort of setup fee, and then they have a sort of setup phase where they don't get paid anything, and then they can start charging the SaaS fee whenever everything is sort of registered and set up.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, that distance in time from signing up to be ready to charge is critical in terms of profitability.
Mhm.
but it wasn't a tracked KPI within the company. It was sort of something that people knew about it. It was a bit of niggling, and some it was more the sort of discussion that some customers are harder to get onboarded because they're less engaged, or they're a more complicated case, or whatever that is, or we got snagged up in some third-party delivery or whatever. Instead of saying that the only thing that matters in this company, doesn't matter who you are here, whether you're marketing or tech or whatever, is getting that time down,
Mhm.
because it's directly influential to our bottom line.
Yeah.
And then OKRs could be then obviously sort of, okay, we know that this particular number is super important, and it's probably one of the only three numbers that matter in the end.
Mhm.
And the OKRs are simple stuff like, okay, reduce the time, and then you have some key metrics within it.
Mhm.
But it keeps everyone on track. I guess
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing. And it's so easy, especially when you've been doing something for a while, and when you get reasonably successful, so stuff isn't that much on fire anymore.
Mhm.
You want to lean back, and you don't want to be so difficult about these trackers anymore, if you see what I mean. And
Yeah.
then you start accumulating dust in the corners, and
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a stickler for those kind of things because I just feel like, you know, if you're a control freak, you have to realize that there's a lot of stuff you can't control that people don't do great if they're over controlled. But so then you have to figure out what can you measure to be like the canary in the coal mine, right? Like, I mean, I think that everyone would be like, yeah, like let's just step back and like let everything run itself, right? Um, that's fantastic, right? Like you give people tons of license to do a great job, and you trust
yeah,
them in that. But there's always stuff that's going to go wrong, either because people don't see it, or they don't realize it, or they didn't have time to see it, or maybe they were negligent. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why stuff can go wrong because it's basically not attended to, right? And
yeah,
the real challenge is how do you keep your finger on all that so that you stay ahead of potential issues without being meddlesome? This is the real hard thing to do,
yeah,
right? Because,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, and it is, I mean, so whichever three KPIs you pick,
yeah,
they're gonna be inherently toxic. You
yeah.
get the behavior you reward and track.
And they're gonna
And
miss some things too, by the way, right? Like yeah. So yeah, it's
and so
yeah.
maybe the way to counter that is that when you sort of think through and you agree on sort of three main or five main metrics or whatever, you also spend an equivalent amount of time thinking of counter metrics that sort of are meant to be that the canary in the mine that pick up when, I mean, we know that these KPIs are going to trigger some behaviors that we don't want.
Mhm.
But we need to measure that we keep those, well, we need to be able to see when these bad behaviors are starting to take over.
Right.
Because if all you do is sort of stubbornly track this one KPI, then that's going to go wrong at some stage too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's also like, when people can manipulate them, right?
Exactly. And they are going to game it, obviously. I mean, if you give me a KPI and that's tied to my bonus, I'm going to get that KPI done. Doesn't matter how. I don't care.
Yeah. 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 This is a challenge. I mean, it's also one area actually I think that tech can help a lot because tech can't manipulate data, right? Like if you set it up, the data is the data. And if you set up kind of measurements that are coming out of the technology aspect of your business, that's difficult for humans to manipulate that or misinterpret it, etc. Going back to the beginning of the topic is like sort of, you know, where does tech end and where does human capital begin, I suppose. And I still think human capital is a huge part of business going forward and everything that we do, despite what people are saying about AI. Right? I mean, I'm shocked, and we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm shocked by people that I know who I consider to be intelligent, who are like, man, AI is like a completely new paradigm. Everything is going to change. Yeah, I agree. Lots of things are going to change related to that. But does that mean that like you're going to have a robot making every decision for you and all the rest of us are going to go play frisbee? Because that's not going to happen anytime soon, right? At least not in any way that you are imagining it, right? It's kind of like the internet. It feels like
Uh,
the advent of the internet, but I think the adoption rate at which this is happening is far faster than the internet because the population, the human population is just more tech savvy than it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
yeah, but at the same time as we kind of aren't. So one thing that I find particularly dangerous with AI is, or the sort of, or the LLMs in particular,
Mm-hmm.
is that people don't seem to get a couple of sort of really basic, really tricky things. So
Mm-hmm.
first of all, there's one thing that sort of has nothing to do with tech, but there's a difference between sounding intelligent and being intelligent. You see
Mm-hmm.
that everywhere. You see it in the pub, the guy with a big mouth. I mean, he sort of sounds reasonably coherent. You kind of believe what he says because yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? And then, so you have that sort of human bias that you come into this with, where if it sounds reasonable, then I'm not going to check the facts. I'm too busy. And then you have the LLMs that aren't designed to be intelligent. They are designed, the statistical engines that are designed to sound intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the worst of the worst in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
They basically spew out stuff that sounds like the most intelligent stuff that you have ever found anywhere, but there's no fact check, and there is no, because they're getting so good at construing their arguments, but they still get all the facts wrong quite often. You're not going to see that because you're not going to double check it. I mean, you go to Perplexity and it picks up tons of sources. Are you going to check all of those 200 sources, whether A, they exist at all, and two, whether they've been interpreted correctly?
Yeah, and then you have kind of mean reversion on wrong information. I think this is, I mean, this is if there are experts out there in any field, they should feel comforted in this point because it's true that maybe let's say it's 60, 70, 80%, some percentage of information that gets aggregated and processed and reprocessed processed in that way is going to be correct. Like it's kind of consensus, right? Like
Yeah,
some of the like this morning we were using AI to ask a question about some sort of like feature item on a tool we're building. And I'm kind of like,
yeah,
okay, I know a lot about this topic, and that absolutely sounds like it's consensus, the information we got. So we're going to make the decision this way. But in more obscure related things, you can imagine how the AI itself could perpetuate an incorrect piece of information or an incorrect conclusion. And that other, call it 5%, call it 10, call it 15, is never checked and actually keeps continually being multiplied, right? Like fake news, right? Kind of the
yeah.
same type of thing. I'm sure that whoever is building these AIs is thinking about that type of learning problem, but it definitely exists, right? But still, if you're an expert, that's your job. Your job is your job is to regulate the 15% that the rest of this thing can't understand, right? And that's great, right? It just means that people need to really be experts, right? You can no longer be a generalist. Like it's not good enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that is one of the sort of strengths of automation and AI, machine learning, whatever, that you can take away some of the more mundane work. But it also this one is tricky though, because everybody sort of say, yeah, you don't have to do manual labor anymore.
Mm,
And so you now, dear whoever, you have the freedom to upskill and you can take a much better paid job. But in many cases, that means a white collar job and far more analysis and far more sort of cerebral and intellectual job. Lots of people just don't want that kind of job.
mhm.
So in terms of, I mean, societal collapse because of AI, there are some tricky things on the horizon there. I mean, no, I mean, we're not going to go into sort of energy consumption of AI and the technology in itself because that's tricky as it is, but we will have to rethink how people are meant to contribute in society when
Mhm.
so many of these sort of, I mean, manual or less productive, I guess that's sort of a sort of political term, but less productive
I
jobs are taken away.
I think jobs will change, right? I mean, I it's probably a bad and overused example, like say like a truck driver, right? Like, do you
Mhm.
have a self-driving car?
No, no,
I don't have a self-driving car either, but I have a car that like can drive on the road without you touching the wheel, right? But
Yeah,
it can't navigate. Um, it makes driving so much easier, right? And like I still have to sit in the car, right? I still do other stuff in the car, but like other things that I might do, like be on the phone or even like eat something or all the rest of these things makes it safer, easier, less mentally taxing. I arrive at the end of the trip more capable of doing things. So generally, just like my quality of that time is gone up, right? In
yeah,
exchange for this thing. It's not that I've gotten out of the task completely, right? And so I look at this, if you look at that analogy to like someone who drives a vehicle for a living, it's going to make them more capable and available mentally to do, maybe they don't do a white collar job, right? But they might be able to do something more technical that might relate to like logistics management or something that's going to allow the optimization of that system, but doesn't involve the complete removal of the human being, right? And I mean, maybe someday there is a complete removal of the human being, but this all happens in degrees. And of course, in the meantime, the world adjusts, right? I mean, obviously the world will adjust, right?
yeah,
I view this also like that's the role that AI plays in my everyday life. Like I use it I use it to like scan documents and things like that. I mean,
sure.
of course I do. Like it means that I don't have to spend the same mental energy focusing on that stuff. I can use mental energy to focus on something else, which is of higher value. It's great. Um,
Yeah,
but I think that, as I said, it basically requires like a greater sophistication of almost every job, right? Which
yeah.
I think that's natural, right? Like, that
Well,
doesn't mean
I
it
guess it's
doesn't
sort
mean it's
of
a white collar job. It just means that, you have more expertise in the space that you're in, and you're using the technology in a different way. Yeah. So,
yeah. I mean, in principle, I kind of agree. I mean, I think we're both sort of clearly eternal learners, and we're kind of comfortable with challenge, and we actively seek it out. I mean, this is sort of typical founder profile. But I think we also need to be careful when this new society is being inadvertently designed, because tech is moving so fast that nobody's designing it, it's just happening.
mhm.
And we kind of assume that everybody out there would think the same way as us. Because I mean, to your point about the scenario, I mean, if you get rid of the sort of long haul lorry drivers, and you maybe one step is to bring them all into a sort of control center where they're autonomous on the road, but you have 10 people just checking in with all of the lorries, and just if they get in a sticky situation, you help them manually take over control, whatever that is.
Mm.
Which again, from a sort of optimizing point of view, makes a lot of sense. But what about all the people that actually wanted to be lorry drivers? They wanted that sort of semi-nomadic lifestyle, and I mean, I,
You know what? Like I want to be a fisherman that just, grows my food and goes out fishing. Like, I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot of idyllic lives which we all want to have that used to be normal, right?
sure,
I think that's I think using the word progress is a little bit disingenuous. I think that's just the way the world works, right? Like if the population is going to get larger and larger, which it is, we need to get more efficient about the way that we use the resources to feed and clothe ourselves, which is essentially what we're still doing. I mean, regardless of how technologically advanced we are, we still need to eat, and, reproduce and be warm, right? Like those,
yeah,
just like the cavemen did, right? Like at the end of the day, that we all have to do that, and the manner is how we get that done, right? Like how do we get that done at some sort of scale, right?
yeah. And I
Or
think,
we just have to have a smaller population. It's just like that, right? So
yeah, I mean, there are people who sort of say that we're going to peak out to 10 billion anyway for lots of reasons. But I guess the sort of the point I'm trying to make there is that now, right now, it's sort of tech driven what's happening to society.
yeah,
And it's almost like the only hype that we're discussing is that, oh, so when humans, all they have left to do is just go and sit on the beach and drink margaritas, what are we then going to do? Isn't that going to be a bit boring? What's our purpose? Blah, 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 blah. And I think the sort of the tricky situation is going to be when we end up with social unrest, because we're taking away jobs from people, sort of what we would call sort of lower skilled or more easily replaceable jobs, from people at such a tempo that closing
yeah.
down the mines in the 80s is nothing, nothing.
Mm.
And I mean, taking away the purpose from us white collar sort of tech workers is not an issue when you take away the livelihoods of 30 million people in one massive go over 5 years. And so I
Yeah.
think what I'm sort of trying to say, I'm not stopping tech. That
Mm.
will and should move forward, but we need to have a discussion about what we're going to do afterwards because people's lives are changing and not necessarily always for the better.
Yeah, I also think that for the capitalist distortion of all this is that the creation of these tools allows for a lot of the benefit, which is partially gets manifested in economic benefit to accrue to, a very few people, um,
Yeah.
very, very few people. You both on a global level and on a, depending upon what society you live in, on a societal level too. I mean, there are some societies, socialist societies, that have mechanisms in place to do a little bit more redistribution of this, but others that have no capability of doing that, right? And
Yeah.
are, from a bureaucratic perspective, also incapable of even making decisions around some of those things. I mean, I like my own country. I mean, I think like these issues, I mean, they might talk about these things in the news, but you look at a country like the US, and not only are the decisions hard to make, but like the bureaucracy of the government is just so gridlocked that to make sweeping decisions that would actually put some of this stuff into place in a sustainable way, like, of course you can have executive orders every 4 years that, swing the pendulum back and forth, but I think in a sustainable way, forget about it. And I think in the US, many people will disagree with on this, like, we fall back on like the power of capitalism to take care of this. And I think that there is that, but there's also the folks that miss that train for whatever reason and fall out of that situation. And you see more and more evidence of it visually, I think, in the country, right? Like this situation.
Yeah,
And
and it's kind of
one way to deal with that is through redistribution of wealth, which is tax, right? I think that's probably the only mechanism the government has any sort of immediate capability to deal with, right? But that's very inefficient to do that.
yeah, and I sort of have had plenty of discussions about that too. I mean, there's a huge discussion in Norway right now in terms of wealth tax, and there's also an exit tax that is becoming, well, depending on which sort of size you listen to, it's becoming really tricky in terms of the founder environment
Mm-hmm.
and access to capital and all of these things. Um, what I find fascinating is that when things are moving so quickly, and especially now with this type of technology that is intangible. If you look at the Industrial Revolution, I mean, there was limits to how quickly you can get a tractor out in the field because you had to build it and then you had to transport it and train people how to use it and blah, blah, blah. And
Mm-hmm.
now you just whip some software together and you suddenly change 10,000 people's lives. And I have a feeling lots of these misdistribution problems are completely apolitical.
Yeah.
There is no sort of evil agenda behind that. This is just natural progression. The problem, to your point, is that the political structures that are meant to, I mean, from my perspective, I grew up in Norway, so we have a sort of a relatively free market, but with some guardrails. But the guardrails aren't functional anymore. Everything is just moving so fast. I mean, and Norway is a very rich country, so it's ended up with sort of lottery winner sickness, where they spend a lot of money on things that weren't actually that urgent because we kind of fixed all the other things, and you end up with, at least from my personal point of view, with a certain degree of intellectual laziness. We end up whinging about things that don't actually matter.
Yeah.
But
Well,
thinking about sort of 50, 100 years out, which is tricky, nah.
it's a challenging question in rich countries, right? Particularly because time moves slowly, right? Like you have these, you can have one or two or three generations that go through this kind of like malaise. And like in Japan, they have a current generation that's in their like 40s or 50s that are in this malaise. You also have
Yeah,
to recognize that just in human history, like we're in an unprecedented time of wealth, right? I mean, maybe you could argue like that Rome was like this wealthy, right? Like, but it's a different context. Um, like before World War II, so many of these countries were not wealthy. They were poor, right? And so
Yeah.
we've spent, 80 years getting wealthy. And in 80 years, you cycle through like two or three major generations of people, birthing, and so of course, like this idea that we have kids that are growing up in a very privileged situation en masse is not surprising, right? Because you had a generation of people coming out of the war times that everything was up and they accumulated wealth and they fought hard and they worked hard and they wanted to insulate their children from those same sorts of pains and sorrows that they had, and so they did that, and then the generation happened again and doing similar thing, and now you just have
Yeah.
people that are like, why would I need to work? I don't have to, right? So they don't do that.
Yeah, and I guess also in terms of the sort of the provider instinct, but I guess also in addition, you have the competitive instinct. So
Mhm.
if you look at the typical billionaire, you're well beyond providing for your family and the future generations. So that's probably not what drives you. It's
Yeah,
sort of taken over to be a sort of, well, I'll beat the other guy. I mean, his yacht is 300 meters long, mine is going to be 350.
yeah,
Just because I can, not because I have to.
yeah.
And to sort of link it to the pain points that we talked about earlier, maybe, well, I was going to say maybe good decisions can be made in environments where there are clearer pain points. And I was kind of thinking of developing countries, but I'm not so sure that's true either, because again, you have massively distributed access to the tools that are required to amass wealth.
Hmm.
So even if the country isn't as wealthy, then the people who are getting wealthy are the top end anyway, and they have the mobility and the sort of means to protect that. It's like, I mean, this sort of wealth tax discussion where we're losing billionaires in Norway. I'm like, why are you even trying to tax that stuff? People with money have the inclination and the money to buy advice to get them out of the pickle. It's
Yeah,
not going to hit them. What's the few people that's going to hit that kind of thing, the wealth tax in this case, is going to be the sort of lower end of the middle classes who have just enough money to hit the threshold, but don't have the money to go and get it fixed. Nobody else.
yeah,
So it doesn't make any sense, and all you're doing is creating a lot of noise, and then also you're sort of pandering to the people who feel hard done by or sort of or excluded from this thing instead of doing the hard thing, which is like, okay, where are we going to be in 50 years from now?
hmm,
And I think that's also about the whole trying to sort of desperately connect it back to the company topic. Um, a thing that I see too little of is what I call sort of midterm planning. So it's not the sort of day-to-day hustle, the survival, just survive this quarter, do X, Y, and Z. We have priorities for the next year or whatever. And it's not the dreamy, what are we going to do when we're VC backed and we IPO and all of that stuff 10 years out. It's more
hmm,
the, what's that company going to look like 3 years from now? And what's the org chart going to look like? And then multiple versions of it. So what's the
yeah,
org chart going to look like in months 3, 6, 12, 15, and so on? And then corresponding budgets and activity levels and processes that change and transmogrify and all of that stuff. That's hard. But
yeah.
if the founder doesn't think about it, I mean, who have you hired who would think about it?
No one's gonna have the scope of that to think about it. Anyway, a lot of difficult discussions. Jan, as usual, we could keep talking forever, but I've got to run. It's been great chatting. We'll let you know when we're gonna publish it, and until then, I wish you all the best.
Awesome. It's a pleasure. It was good fun.
Yeah, take
Speak
care.
to you
Talk
soon.
soon. Cheers.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye.